この番組はご覧のスポンサーの提供でお送りします。Alrighty, welcome everyone. I'm Teeaboo, and I am here for Mobile Suit Zeta Gundam, or at the very least, I'm here to talk about Mobile Suit Zeta Gundam. I don't know whether we're gonna get to the shit at all. This is Rewind 2, essentially. I laid out what I wanted to do in Rewind 1, and we skimmed through the first episode of Zeta Gundam in order to get closer to some understanding of the concepts and the characters. And I think I'm closer to the concept of understanding the concepts than characters. I think that the ongoing discussions that have been continuing to happen in my Discord and elsewhere about those discussions have been interesting. And just based on the viewership, more people watched the Rewind than they did the other two videos that I posted the other day, which makes some sense, because it seems to be where I'm going with this, and it is. So, that seems good. Not great, but good. Great might be if I felt confident about going through the thing in general anyway. Well, I'll say this. I'll say what I said in the Daily Brew, which is that I'm going to do Gundam today, and I don't know what that means, because I don't know what I need. And I don't know when I'll be satisfied. And I don't know where I'll get it. So I'm going to go all over the place. And I'm going to record it. And it might be useless. And so what I put up might be nothing. This video might never go up. What might happen is next week I might just watch the next episode of Gundam and leave this be. But I think we have some more unpacking to do. Because I don't fucking get it. And I get that that's okay. I get that that's okay. A lot of people have responded saying that they feel like it's unnecessary for me to feel like I've gotten it. And I think that they're right to some degree. Tomino's writing is complex, and it's part of a great tapestry, and a lot of the people who are commenting things that I've missed are doing so from the perspective of having seen the whole show, and the whole Universal Century Gundam series. And so, of course, they have a bigger picture than I do, and that makes all the sense of the entire universe. But there are some things that I'm really just not getting, clearly, and it feels bad on my end. And it feels, again, as I said before, it feels wrong to continue without ironing those out, without going back. It feels like a sticking point that I have to fix before we can roll on forward. So I'll mention something about it, which is hard to do, and I'll apologize in advance because I think it's easier to ask for maybe forgiveness than permission. And partly, what I'm about to discuss is a bunch of stuff that was sent to me by somebody who I think is important to me. So Jikalaitsa, who's a name that comes up pretty often in this channel and in this show in particular, and whose name appears at the beginning of every Gundam episode for a reason. And part of the reason is that Jikalaitsa was a member of the high tier of my Patreon for a long, long time. And I say was because Jikalaitsa has moved to somewhere else for reasons that are not bad. No blood, no bad blood, no hard feelings. We disagree on a couple of points, and GK is going to pursue some things on GK's own. And that's damn good for GK. But it's pretty rough for me, because GK was a touchstone of wisdom that I relied upon heavily for both Overdrive and Mobile Suit Gundam, and Zeta Gundam, in terms of comprehension and knowledge, simply knowledge, of the basis of a lot of the animation, a lot of the things that are going on in these series. I'll just say this. Thank you, Jikalaitsa, for every bit of help that you have provided me regarding Gundam and Overdrive and this channel as a whole. It would not be anything like what it is if it were not for you. And I think you're watching this, so I hope you're watching this, and thank you. And I mean it. And I believe that our disagreement is not what you think it is, but that's acceptable. You need to do what you need to do, and I love you for it. I love you for it. But GK went and he sent me a bunch of interviews. Now, he's asked me to lie and not mention that he found them and sent them to me. I won't do that. I don't lie, GK. I do not. So, if you feel embarrassed or it seems wrong to you that I'm using your name, I'm sorry, but I'm going to use your name because it's true and because you deserve attribution. These are interviews from Tomino, and this is where we're going to start. So we have O and T. I don't know who O is. Firstly, the fact that most of the main characters of First Gundam had turned into failed adults. Char is full of conflicts and is living among the Aeug with the atmosphere of, I don't actually want to be doing these kinds of things. Amuro is also Amuro and is closed off and cowardly. He's become the type of adult who gets told things like, what are you, the very disrespectful you, in a place like this? What are you doing in a place like this? By Cats, who used to be a tiny child in 0079. Were those character settings something that was unavoidable? And Tomino responds, if we are talking purely about the technicalities of creating a dramatic story, I think it was unavoidable. Basically, the young man who is known as the main character of Mobile Suit Gundam, through his relationships with the surrounding characters and by being there through a series of coincidences, just happened to be in the right place at the right time. He was not a character worthy of becoming a hero, and that is the conclusion of the first Gundam. You could say that he survived, so he is a hero, but the truth is there is no way he could have become a hero. What's important is what happens after. In the end, in life, unless you've been dealt supremely good cards, one success is not enough to earn a lifetime supply of food. Yeah? Just because they've had a success, and that's very interesting coming from Tomino, who has had a couple of big successes that have earned him a lifetime supply of food, as far as I know. So that's interesting. Just because they've had success, there are some people who just sit around on that success. Tons of them. And then there are those who continuously keep working hard, but their once had success was actually born out of the luck of the moment, and is not actually the result of their own skill. Believing your success is something transcendent about you as opposed to some coincidence in the universe. And so you continuously keep working hard and you wonder why you don't hit the same success over and over and over again. Well, because the same circumstances haven't resulted. That's a powerful thought. In reality, we see those kinds of cases all the time. Basically, Mobile Suit Gundam is a story that observes people, with a young man like Amuro at its center, and within that story, the only person with actual merit to be a hero is Char. Well, he's driven to be. He's trying to accomplish something. He has a goal. Amuro doesn't have a goal. Amuro's existence is in relation to enemies, entirely. Is in relation to being forced into doing things, entirely. He's shaped by the societies around him, by the circumstances that he's thrust upon and thrust into, and by Char's own, endless pursuit of him and White Base in order to steal or destroy it. Very much the members of White Base are shaped by opposition, not by their own goals. So that's a good point. Besides him, most of the characters are normal people. So the characters of First Gundam that appear in Zeta are normal adults who in fact are either sitting on their past successes or are exhausted from those previous experiences. Those people have to now get back into action again. This time it's not a coincidence, they must be more strategic about things in order to succeed. Speaking of Char, after he defeated the Zabi family, he did not feel like becoming the king of Zeon. So then he thought, if I am to keep living, what should I do to keep on living from here on out? What would be the way forward that I could stomach? So Char is the revolutionary who's achieved his goal of toppling the state, and that's it. That's all he's achieved, and so what's he going to do next? That explains the rebuilding of White Base and the seeking of the ethereal that he's missing. And he lost it in Lala, too, because he had this vision of ephemeral future in her. And he sought that, I think, it's implied that he sought that in the interim with the young girl who's now being the leader of Axis. And so he sees a reflection of her in her. During that time, Char was someone who had his abilities recognized while he was doing whatever he wanted in a Zeon-like organization. Therefore, he realized that he is the one who is to be at the center during the reconstruction of the organization. Even though that's not really his thing, there must have been a moment when he saw that it was unavoidable. This is a natural flow of thought, even thinking back to his personality from the beginning of MSG. Well, similarly, you can't... The person who overthrows the dictatorship or who overthrows the current status quo ends up becoming heralded as leader, but then usually they get stabbed in the back. It's any of the revolutionaries, grand revolutionaries, which is what he was. He was doing whatever he wanted in a Zeon-like organization. And so we get a reflection of him in Yazan, I think. It's echoes and shadows. So it's really that Zeta is a response to MSG itself. He told the one story. Well, it's also his story, because he told the story of revolution. Tomino did, and now he has to tell the story after it. What's the story that's after it? Well, it's the story that's the story about the story that's after it. Oh. Well, that does a lot to help. In a weird, hyper-confusing way, that does more to help than pretty much anything that I've done so far, so what do you know? This is a natural flow of thought, even thinking back to his personality from the beginning of Mobile Suit Gundam. So it was nothing special. Fuck you, Tomino. Yeah, just, a deep insight about the way that humans deal with their change and the overall concept of having reached a goal, really, is what he's talking about. I just wrote it into a story and it was nothing special. It's just the way that it is. That's the problem, is that Tomino views all these things as nothing special or just explorations or explanations of the way that things actually are. And he doesn't seem to recognize that his perspective is not normal. Most people don't see through other people's patterns of behavior this way. Unless you're on acid. Unless you're on acid, actually. As far as I know. So that's a thing. Holy shit. The problem was whether I could use this idea in a robot-themed serial program. After much thought, I concluded that I should do what was most obvious, because it was true. The reason was that if I were the kind of writer that could make huge secular hits, I could have created the hero story that I wanted. But I don't have that kind of ability, and the production and sponsor side asked me to do Gundam again, which made me realize that TV staff are the type of people who do not have their abilities widely recognized. Whoa, what? After much thought, okay, the problem was whether I could use this idea, the flow of the thing to do in the center of the reconstruction of the organization. Just, it's so clear that Tomino doesn't know what the fuck he wants, actually. It's so clear to me reading this that Tomino is backward justifying his reasoning in a way that he actually had no idea what he was doing. I'm not trying to say that as an insult. That's a base level of human behavior. We do things, especially artistic things, with no justification. It was nothing special. False. The problem was whether I could use this idea in a robot-themed serial. I concluded that I should do what was most obvious, which is to say I'll pursue the thing that is obvious to me. If I were the kind of writer that could make huge secular hits, which he is, I could have created the hero story that he wanted, which he did. Actually, the hero story that he wanted wasn't the hero story that he wanted, really, right? Amuro's hero story is one of the greatest hero stories. And he thinks it's not a hero story because Amuro's not a hero. He's forced to become one, and it happens by chance. But that's the story of certain types of heroes, and it resonates. I mean, it's also the story of well, in lots of cases, it's the young man drafted into the military story. How about that? Amuro is a young man who doesn't know what he wants in the world, and the world says, "You're a soldier now, bitch." And he's like, "No, I don't want to. Lock me away. Put me in a cell. I don't want responsibility. No. No." And the world goes, "No, you're a soldier now, bitch." And he has to be a soldier, and he ends up being good at it. I don't know. But I don't have that kind of ability, and the production and sponsor side asked me to do Gundam again, which made me realize that TV staff are the type of people who do not have their abilities widely recognized. Onishi is who's interviewing. Just double checking, but the environment director Tomino was in, and the stance with which the show was made, the way how the people around you were only seeing Gundam as a keyword to business is the reason why you started disliking the show? Well, yes, that is a big factor. As someone who loves Zeta Gundam very much, I feel saved hearing those words. It's not like you dislike the show itself. Got it. Okay. So he's trying to evaluate, because Tomino has said that he doesn't like it, but what he's saying is that he didn't like how Gundam became a business idea and a marketing thing instead of what it was. Which, of course, is what it was from the beginning, but what are you going to do? In regards to that, says Tomino, it's as I stated earlier. When I started working on it, I thought, wow, the world of Gundam is amazing. This entry point was definitely not a mistake. I managed to create that world building, or the foundation, even within the robot genre, and with Gundam I had concrete feelings that this is going to last, or I can run 10 years on this. Zeta Gundam was even deeper than the people who were making it for business thought, but they didn't notice that. And the response from Onishi is, because the work itself lives on. When I received the offer for this interview from director Tomino, I was extremely happy, but also had a moment of doubt because I didn't know how to process the fact that director Tomino disliked Zeta. I was a bit scared, but hearing all of this, I feel saved. Tomino says, because of this opportunity, I thought it would be bad that I haven't seen it in so long, so I watched up until volume 4 of the DVDs. That's interesting. So I don't know how far in he watched. I was wondering whether it's if there's any lineup with where I dropped off and got confused and where he did, but I don't think so. So I watched up until volume 4 of the DVDs. To tell you the truth, I was a bit surprised. I mentioned how I had a feeling that Gundam would last 10 years, but when I look at it with fresh eyes, I thought, what the heck, this is properly made. I was under the impression that it was more poorly put together. Is that so? Yes, because only the bitter memories remained. I don't think it's well made, but I can see my effort to work through things seriously without going crazy. Wow, I really did work hard on it. I have no clue what the staff at the time were thinking as they worked on it, but I can see moments here and there where I can tell that they were very nervous as they were making it. I'm really glad this has been immortalized as a DVD, and I think it is a fortunate series in that sense. To tell you the truth, I think it's pretty amazing. You can laugh at this story. No, I can't laugh. It's a very important series to me. While I am happy to hear that, I am also impressed by my sensibilities. TV series are made within many limitations in terms of production. In that sense, at 60 years old, I've finally learned to stop saying annoying things like, I'm a mere bystander, and say, yes, I am the one who made Zeta Gundam. Okay, so instead of believing that he was just a flowing entity that allowed the production of Zeta Gundam to continue untrammeled by the forces that built it, the artistic forces that built it, as well as the financial and business forces that, and production and distribution forces that built Zeta Gundam. He viewed himself as someone who was not actually in control of the product. And having looked back at it, he actually sees his hand in it, and he goes, wow, I'm shocked. He doesn't recognize that. There's something else about that, the idea that only the bitter memories remained. That we are more attuned to darkness. I've always described this in what I find to be a useful analogy, which is that when you have a blank piece of paper and you put a single black dot on it, the only thing that you ever notice is the black dot, and you cease to recognize the entirety of the paper that is blank and pure. And that's how we are with negatives. It's something that I use to conceptualize how my mother acted, because she only ever could see negatives, could never see all the things that were going right. You know, you could get a report card with, you know, if you'd had 6 classes, you might have 5 A pluses and 1 A minus, and she'd only see the minus, ever. And that's sort of how humans are. We walk into a room and we see the things that are out of place, not the things that are in place, unless we've become immune to them and we just don't care, or we're turned off a little bit. But that's true. And then the other idea, and it's just a mistaken idea that he's got, which is the idea that the limitations prevent creativity or something, or they reduce it. And that's precisely the opposite of what is true. Limitations generate creativity. We've been talking about that in terms of Cyberpunk Edgerunners, so... Well, that's a very useful interview. Thank you. Thank you. I'm so glad that that's saved. Okay. Next chonk. Same guy. Onishi writes, when I was watching it real time, I couldn't understand why Amuro was sleeping inside the Audhumla. Yeah, big boat. He sulks. Char and Hayato, they all vent at me and won't even let me on the Gundam and falls asleep. As a 17-year-old, I couldn't understand it, but now past 30, I get his feelings. People, when put in that situation, there's nothing they can do but sleep, haha. Tomino. Sleeping is a symptom of being in a pretty depressed state, but when you're at that age, you can't simply stay asleep, right? That's why he wakes up and does something. And what he does when he wakes up is something I can finally begin to explain at this age. Basically, normal men and women are living off of willpower and hormones. When you have that energy, the people around you accept the way you express yourself, even without you putting a ton of thought into it. However, when you're desperately trying to work while holding back the fact that you're depressed or always on the verge of snapping, you start only using your brain. Rigidity, actually. In The Whole Brain Child, which talks about brain integration, we call this the flow or the river between rigidity and chaos. The river of peace flows in between them. And rigidity, well, chaos is when you allow your instinct, which he calls willpower and hormones, right? Desire for things and simple desire for things, and you're pumped up for it. Running, going. But when you're desperately trying to do a thing, when everything about you screams that you should be doing something else, that's rigidity. That's holding yourself together. So you're holding back the fact that you're depressed or always on the verge of snapping, and you start only using your brain, your rigid brain. And his terms are mixed, and your willpower, you're using pure force of will to organize yourself into being. And it's a very draining state of being, by the way. And you gotta iron that shit out. If you're living a consistent lie, and that lie is, I don't want to be doing what I'm doing, but I must do what I'm doing in order to survive, you're gonna die on the inside, man. So it's interesting that Tomonio's got that idea. You start only using your brain. People with smarts begin to think about things in a very logical manner. Live a very, very logical life. I ate a proper breakfast today. I pooped. I showered. I wore a collared shirt. They think about things in this logical way. Well, it's habits. It's habits, actually. And again, Tomino doesn't understand everything, and he understands some things that I don't, but he hasn't articulated a lot of them. And so what he's talking about are actually habits. They're the things that you do every day, all day. They think about things in this logical way. And it's also the properness, right? In other words, they aren't thinking with their pheromones. Well, he means neurochemicals, and he means instincts, and he means structural representations, but fine, pheromones. At one glance, they seem very intelligent and like they're working very hard. Well, they're working doubly hard, actually. The moment they step backstage, however, you can see that they're very out of breath. running the rat race, running wheels forever. And this continues all throughout your late 20s and 30s, absolutely. How to prevent this from happening? In fact, if you try hard like this, you'll never escape that depressed state or angry state, right? Because if you're pushing against it, that's just going to consolidate it. In order to escape, you simply put it onto the people on the other side of your thoughts. Then some things actually start getting done, and you can start saying things like, oh, I don't like this, I like that. If so, let's do the project this way. How should we deal with this project? It's because you're doing everything logically that work becomes uptight. That's why there's a lot of salarymen that believe if you think logically and dispassionately, work would be more efficient. Bees. Many Japanese people are capable of this, however, all of them might teeter on the threshold of mental illness. Yeah, because we're not bees. We're wolf bees. We're individual, communal, non-communist. We're capital-communist or anarcho-syndicalist idiots. We're weird. But you can't hold yourself in rigidity. And you can't hold yourself to conformity unless you naturally tend to conformity. You need to follow your repressions. You need to look where you least want to look. Yeah, good shit. Good shit. He's missed the mark immensely. I mean, really, and it's immensely arrogant of me to look at a great artist and writer who's speaking this in an interview, sort of offhand, in his 60s, and saying that he's missed the mark with his life's work. It's very arrogant of me to say that. It's no less true. He doesn't have the words to explain what he's explaining. And if you were to read a few books on psychology, he might get them, actually, which I think is really interesting. Well, he's an artistic person, and that means he's conceptualizing these things that are outside of the self. And he's conceptualized this forceful rigidity, this proper logical way, this hyper-efficient, dispassionate work thing, versus genuine creativity and the willingness to change and the willingness to set out and say what you're passionate about. He's created this dichotomy that is it's the conservative liberal dichotomy, and I don't mean politically, I mean inside your brain. You got one half of your brain that's built for dealing with the unknown and one half that's built for routinization and doing things that you've already done. Literally what he talks about is, I ate a proper breakfast today, I pooped, I showered, I wore a collared shirt. Those are all routinized things that the routinizing part of your brain, routinizing, the part that takes things and turns them into routines, handles. And then there are the parts of your life that are the things that you don't know about because you step out your door and you don't know what the weather is going to be, right? And so you don't know how to handle that and how to deal, and you don't know when you get into work whether you're going to have papers on your desk or not. Somebody else might put them there, and all these different things. Every time you interact with another person, you're interacting with another hyper-complicated computer entity thing, so you don't have routines for that effectively. They're complicated. So that's good. That's really good. Many Japanese people are capable of this, however, all of them might teeter upon the threshold of mental illness. These ideas come across pretty strongly through the characters of Zeta Gundam. Yeah, a depressed kid who gets easily angered and runs around punching people. Yeah. He's sort of the opposite. He's like flying in the face of rigidified societies. We all have to go this way or else. And he's like, fuck you. He doesn't even like being called his name, right? He doesn't even like having a label put on him. He's like, fuck you. Fuck all y'all. Especially the depression part. Japanese people after the bubble burst or the easily angered teens nowadays, they're all depressed. Immensely. Immensely. To people who have depression, I say watch Zeta Gundam. You'll feel more at ease knowing that there are other people out there like you. The one problem with Zeta is that you'll feel at ease, but there's no solution to survival depicted in it. Ooh. Okay, well, it's not the one problem. There are other problems with Zeta, but the big problem with Zeta, in Tomina's own reckoning, is that you'll feel ease with the knowledge that there are other people who are depressed, but it won't give you a solution. I don't know if that's true. Because it feels like what I've watched of Zeta Gundam so far, if we look at it from that context of like, Kamiyu is a representation of the depressed youth struggling to find a way to integrate both his hormonally driven, and logically driven sides, which I do think is an accurate, on one perspective, one axis, an accurate summary of Kamiyu. A different axis, there are tons of different things going on, but I think it's accurate to say that he's a He's a sort of a depressed kid who's got all these things going on and all these talents, but he doesn't know what to do with them because nothing feels like it has a point, and his family unit is fucked, and all progress seems fucked and fraught and stupid and wrong. And he doesn't quite get it. And then the process that he undergoes, that he's in, is the process of seeking an answer for the depression, or something like it, seeking a place of being. And my position is that the process is the answer to its own question, actually. Because while you're in the process, you end up in a flow state, and while you're in that flow state, you're not depressed, by definition. I think definitionally, when you're in flow, you're in harmony with the universe in a way that means you are not depressed. And Camus is quite good at piloting, actually, and when he is piloting, he gets into a zone where he's not himself anymore. And he's not thinking about thinking, exactly. He's doing. And when you're doing, you're not depressed, because you're acting. Depression is a thinking disease, not an action disease. And it's very hard to be depressed actively while you're doing stuff. You know what I mean? It's like the opposite of depression is doing things. To the point where, if I'm going to go and believe something that Huberman said... Yeah, quote, it's on Anthony Huberman. I don't know if any of these people are canceled, okay? So I'm just gonna say that, all right? I don't fucking know. Not Anthony, Andrew Huberman. The specific quote is on the Rich Roll podcast, and neuroscientist Dr. Andrew Huberman from the Stanford he's got a Stanford lab for neuroscience, and he's making tons of videos, and they're awesome. Behavior first, thoughts, feelings, and perceptions follow, is the quote. The action actually determines the behavior and the thinking, not the other way around. It's like motivation doesn't exist. It's action that creates motivation. Crazy thing to imagine. But Camus does it. The answer, very interestingly, is the process of seeking the answer, I think. And I think that Tomino answered it for himself in the process of seeking the answer through his depictions of Camus. Oh. Okay. Next, Chonk, on Emma and Rakoa. But what compelled the two women, and especially Rakoa, into being so affixed on their identities as women? Tomino. When it comes down to it, the two of them are talking about an identity that represents the idyllic image that men hold of women. Damn right, both of them. To sum up why this is, Rakoa is a good example. She never makes the attempt to take a stand for herself, even after how she was treated in Jaburo, and she maintains a state of denial by making excuses like, I'm looking for the man who will fulfill me. And she ultimately ends up looking for a way to become dependent on a man. Woof. As a man, this is extremely gratifying to see. Emma is extremely similar to Rakoa, and I believe the two characters are fundamentally the same in this sense, because they're both fundamentally male depictions of women, which is a faulty lens, let's say. But at least he says that what she is the idyllic image that men hold of women. When he says that men hold of women, he means that he holds of women, right? Because, like all of us, Tomino has the habit of generalization. And if Tomino were a YouTuber, people would be chewing him up and spitting him out for it. Regardless, she is an attempt to represent the broader idyllic representation of woman, specifically in Rakoa's place as being dependent upon man. Which tracks. Extremely gratifying to see. So, she ultimately ends up looking for a way to become dependent on a man. As a man, this is extremely gratifying to see, and Emma is extremely similar to Rakoa, and I believe that the two characters are fundamentally the same in this sense. Has Tomino been married? I assume so. So, he has been married, and he has daughters. Whoa, interesting. That's really interesting, so... At least in his life, maybe this is precisely how he sees women. I think a lot of women would have issue with the idea of women being dependent upon a man. I also think a lot of those women might be dependent upon men, or just society, or other women, or other people. Because people are dependent on people, and 50% of people are men, so it makes sense that women might be dependent on men. But also, I think men are dependent on women, so maybe it might track that the flip side might be true as well. She never makes an attempt to take a stand for herself, even after how she was treated at Jaburo, and she maintains a state of denial by making excuses like, I'm looking for the man who will fulfill me, instead of standing up for herself. So what he's saying is that she probably should stand up for herself, but gives into some fundamental not even flaw or weakness, I don't want to color it that way, some fundamental element of her being draws her toward dependency on someone. Freud would say that has nothing to do with her being female and much more to do with how she was raised in childhood. So, we don't know how Rako was raised in childhood, but that's like, if we were to psychoanalyze the character, that's where he'd go with it, probably. Interesting. In respect to Cats, I feel as though he is a character that grew in a way you couldn't have imagined in the prior Gundam series. Couldn't he have been a more innocent character? Tomino: no, definitely not. 7 years is plenty of time for him to change from his boyhood days. In Katz's case, he probably lacked some self-restraint. Well, we see that when he keeps getting into ships and flying off into battle. Growing up with Hayato and Frau as his adoptive parents, he got a sense that Hayato was too straightforward and Frau was too kind. Even after growing up in such an environment, you wouldn't end up as high-strung as he did if you were to have a certain level of self-restraint. However, I believe this is also something that's common among today's children. It's common among all children, Tomino. Children don't have self-restraint. That's a thing that gets taught. Marshmallow test proves it. Well, that's not entirely true. There is variation amongst kids. But so what he's saying is you wouldn't end up as high-strung as he did if you were to have a certain level of self-restraint. That's, to some extent, that's an inbuilt property that can't be trained. I know I've said some contradictory things. It's conscientiousness, because when we marshmallow test young kids, some of them are capable of holding out longer or for the entire period than others. Marshmallow test is simple. You put a marshmallow in front of a kid and you tell them if they wait 10 minutes but they don't eat the marshmallow, you give them another marshmallow. And they get 2. So, does the kid take the thing now or take it later? That's self-restraint and high-strungness and stuff. And it's directly correlated to Big Five trait conscientiousness, the ability to organize yourself and the ability to have willpower and self-restraint. Even after growing up in such an environment, you wouldn't end up as high-strung as he did if you were to have a certain level of self-restraint. However, I believe this is also something that's common among today's children. There's a viewpoint here that's sort of like, well, children are all nurture or something like that, and it feels incorrect. It misses a mark. However, we do have 3 children that have all gone different directions from that outset, so there is some indication that he understands that the kids are literally different, right? In that case, from Char's perspective, would a character like Hamon be viewed the same as Cats? Tomino: you see, Hamon had a sense of admiration for an ideal of a strong male figure, right? That's why she embodies one. However, she wasn't able to comprehend exactly what kind of person fit that archetype. That's probably why she ended up being the woman that she is. Her approach of showing up after the conflict begins, then attempting to take advantage of either side, ultimately makes her a petty villain. She wasn't able to comprehend, or rather, she never really knew what a strong male figure was. She never had an ideal, because the only ones that she saw were destroyed, and so she put herself into that role as the masculine female, because she embodies a masculine role, 100%. She's got the suit and the collar. Caecilia previously was like that too, actually, with her mask and her even hiding her own femininity in a lot of ways. Very stark collar, but also accentuating the femininity in almost a Victorian dress sort of sense with the way that she dressed. Weird and interesting. Hamon Karn is, to me, at present, fitting very traditionally masculine roles. Does that make sense? Leader, patriarchy, authoritarian, puppet master, warrior, pilot. All of these are traditionally masculine roles. We get the opposite. The flip side is sort of Fa, right? Who stepped into the masculine roles of piloting ships and piloting stuff, and then has, from where I'm at in the story, has essentially been told, and maybe believes, and maybe it's correct for her, that her job is to take care of the kids. And it's like, oh, I don't know about that, but maybe it is correct for her. Maybe it's less correct in a broad sense about women. Maybe it's more correct. I don't know enough to know. I'm not a fucking woman. Interesting that he's thinking about that as the perspective. He doesn't address the question about the same perspective as Cats, or viewing them the same, but that's really interesting. The lack of strong male figure is the determining factor of Hamon, which is to say that she's a character of daddy issues incarnate. Hamon incarnate daddy issues. It's an interesting perspective. Okay. Director interview. Okay. Director interview, Yoshiyuki Tomino. Chief director, interviewer, Hideaki Anno. Okay, so we've got Ano and Tomino talking. So two of the great artists. Ano, the planning of Zeta Gundam started a year before the broadcast, that is, around February of '84. This was around the final episode of Aura Battler Dunbean, and just before the first episode of Heavy Metal El Gaim, which began in March. The preparation started at a much earlier stage than the usual TV anime. Why was that? Tomino, Zeta Gundam began directly after Gaim, right? With El Gaim, we inserted a special episode to introduce the program, but we didn't have that with Zeta Gundam. There wasn't even a single week's gap. I can't believe we pulled it off. I've gotten old, and now I know I don't have that stamina. And now I don't have that stamina and energy. It wouldn't have occurred to me just 1 year ago. But there's one important thing about that story. Big black box of text, which I'm sure are spoilers. I started getting serious around February of '84. The name Kamyu Bidan appeared in my memos around June, and by that point it was definitely serious. Discussion of the next project for the following year would happen around June or July. In order to firm up the plan by then, I'd begun searching for a name for the protagonist since the end of spring. I ended up with the name of Camille Claudel, an apprentice of the sculptor Rodin. When I learned about her personal history, I decided to use Camille as a man's name. In fact, everything about the character of Camille Claudel was transferred over to Camille Bidan. It was somewhat unfortunate for Zeta Gundam as a work, but I needed a character like Camille to bring back the feelings that had flown from me during El Gaim. Alright, let's find out who the fuck Camille Claudel is. Ano, there was a later... Okay, I will just read on. There was later a film about Camille Claudel, but at the time, nobody knew her name. She was a woman who spent half her life in mental hospitals. Tomino. Of course it was. At the time, I instinctively used someone like Claudel as a model in reaction to El Gaim, but now I can explain it better. The position of her master Rodin in relation to Camille Claudel is also that of the Zeta Gundam to Camille. I think that construction is the easiest to grasp. While the relationship between Claudel and Rodin was romantic, it seems that she actually created half of Rodin's works, but to the public it seemed that Claudel's own works were made by Rodin, and so she broke down out of frustration. Oh, misattribution of production. Rodin, on the other hand, went down in art history as a result, but thinking about him as a single human, there's no way that Rodin came into existence by himself. There must have been people like Claudel as well. Likewise, Gundam can't be created only by the Gundam itself. In short, the relationship between Claudel and Rodin is a sample that symbolically expresses the relationship between an object and the person it represents. That's why I was enthralled by Camille. So he doesn't know it, but he's actually seeking the concept of strange loop. At least that's how I see it. The self that cannot observe the self is the Gundam that is the robot, and so you need a self within the self, which is Camille, which is the thing within the thing that can't observe the thing itself, which is the ego within the id. It's the, id, ego, superego. Because superego is society, right? No, the ego is the realistic part that mediates between the desires of the id and the superego. But the superego sort of is the outside goal. So the id is sort of the body, and Camille is stuck between because he's the ego. He's the thing between them. He's not the moral conscience itself, but he has one. And part of the one that he has is reflected in Char. It's reflected in Char, in people punching him, and in women respecting him or disrespecting him. So the superego is demonstrated as cultural, right? It's reflected back at Camille, and it turns into his own reasonings. And that's why he has to have his mother and his father die, so that he's left adrift and has to choose his own symbologies, which he gets largely from Char when he can. But he also gets it from Amuro as well, because Amuro is a hero goal, father, man, person, predecessor, footstep creator, thinker, all of these things. The robot is just a robot. It doesn't do anything on its own. It doesn't really have any desires on its own. And then Camille is in between, so he's the thing that embodies all of the... He is it as well, right? Like, it's all multi-layered. It's all the things at once, all together, all at once. And that's his sexual and aggressive drives and his hidden memories, which is exactly right for Camille, right? He is aggressive, he is defensive, he has no identity, at least as self. He doesn't identify the way that he identifies. Man, that's really good. Likewise, Gundam can't be created only by the Gundam itself. The relationship between Claudel and Rodin is a sample that symbolically expresses the relationship between an object and the person it represents. That's why I was enthralled by Camille. Ano, in your comments at the time, you said that, to me, young people today all seem like Camille. Tomino, that's how I felt. In Rodin's day, there must have been plenty of people who became depressed and ended up in a hospital as it worsened. There weren't that many mental hospitals. And we don't know that much about depression because it wasn't well documented or studied. We know that there was soul death, and we know that there's been loss of motivation and deep despair, and we've seen it in a lot of artists. I mean, lots and lots of artists. So, yeah, for sure. But I don't know how many hospitals there were. Anyway, in modern times, there are some people for whom that can become customary. Tons. Thanks to changes in value systems and lifestyles, you'll notice that what would once have been seen as nonconformism has now become customary in the situation of Tokyo. My apologies for the rather confusing example, but to me, convenience store onigiri don't taste like onigiri, but children today say they're delicious. Even in the sense of taste, which seems immutable, has changed completely between 30 years ago and today. Okay, taste is not immutable, bro. Neither is sensation. In the same way, things... Not even close. So he's missing the Herodotus idea about change and rivers changing and people changing. He's missing that. He probably gets it somewhere else. He just hasn't clicked it. Has changed completely between 30 years ago and today. In the same way, things that once felt abnormal have crept into our sense of the ordinary. I don't know if that's good or bad. Neither do I. It just is. The abnormal becomes normalized. It just is. I mean, go back 100 years ago and dress the way people dress, and you're a fucking freak. You're showing ankle. How dare you? Drop a gym guy and a gym girl from the gym, modern gym, back 50 years into a gym 50 years ago. It's absurd. Get fucking arrested for indecency immediately. Immediately. Imagine spandex short shorts and a sports bra. Fucking crazy. We normalize the quote-unquote abnormal all the time. And that can go in a very negative direction. We can normalize depression. Now, there are some elements of that are correct. Depression is a normal thing, and there shouldn't be stigma around it, right? But it shouldn't be normal. It shouldn't be normal to be depressed. The portion of our population that's on SSRIs, self-included, is way too high, man. It's not right, so there's something wrong. We've normalized it maybe too much. Destigmatization is different from normalization. Let's say that. Let's put that one out there. So similarly, maybe you could destigmatize convenience store cheap onigiri. But maybe you don't want to normalize cheap onigiri because then onigiri start tasting worse. Weird example, but a good one. When I was making Zeta Gundam, I felt there were many boys like Kamyu, and as an old man, I couldn't see that as a desirable phenomenon. I can say this because, to me, this work has become part of the past, but in the long run, things that change as a matter of custom don't really matter. In the end, the most important thing is that people's mentality is a product of the way that they've been raised, and recently I've come to feel the aspects that change with customs don't matter very much. The important thing is that people's mentality is a product of the way that they've been raised. No, it's that, and it's their biology underlying and their structures. And the stories that they represent, which are things that he's represented in story. And recently I've come to feel that the aspects that change with customs don't matter very much. I don't know what he means by that. When he says, I felt like there were many boys like Kamyu, something that I find really interesting about Kamyu looking back now as I look back is his identity struggle. Because he's got this core identity struggle where he's like, well, Camille is a girl's name, and it literally is. It's stolen from Camille Claudel, a French female, a girl, and his name is Camille, and he hates it at first. He hates it. Hates his name, hates his identity. Doesn't want to be seen as girly. In any way, wants to be as mask as he can be. Which is like a repressive rejection sort of thing. And I'm thinking about this in the context of my own dysphoria that I experienced over the last couple of years, which has resolved, by the way. Which is interesting, and it's resolved as man for me. Which is interesting. But I have the distinct impression that it didn't have to resolve that direction, and I could have resolved it in a different way. And come to the conclusion that I am not aligned with my biological identity, which would be weird for me. Might work for some people, but I don't think it would have worked for me. And Camus' got an element of that, and it's an element that I find myself still struggling with, which is that there are inherently elements of every man that are feminine, or at least called such. And maybe they shouldn't be, but they are. They're correlatively female traits. Correlatively. Aggression correlates with masculinity. To some extent. Now, aggression also correlates with femininity, but in a very different way, and that's an interesting thing to know. And maybe we should erode the boundaries between them because those traits seem to be universalizable, not just separatable, right? It strikes me as a man can be quite motherly and a woman can be quite fatherly. And like Haman Karn is a woman who can be quite patriarchal and authoritarian. And that's not necessarily a male thing. And I think there are men who can be quite communal and sociable and social butterflies in a way, and those are generally considered femme traits. And there are parts of me that are femme, and they're embarrassing. They're embarrassing. And parts of them are deep embarrassments. One, here's a correlatively male trait. It's being big. Size, larger size in humans correlates with masculinity and maleness. You take boys and girls with the same base genetic code, and the boys end up taller and bigger and stronger and have bigger upper body strength and bigger legs and bigger musculature and all these things. And I'm quite small, so that seems like a feminine sort of cowardly. It feels like an embarrassing trait. It's not. It's not. But it feels like one, and I've spent a lot of time hating that part of me. And other parts of me that are femme. I mean, I've talked about wearing leggings or wearing yoga pants and enjoying it and trying to figure out why. And I've ceased doing so. I've gone to shorts. I had this fake thought, this false idea in my head that I didn't like wearing shorts. And I had this feeling, this literal feeling that I had a few times of standing somewhere wearing shorts and feeling sweat drip down my legs, down below the short, and hating it, just hating it. So pants, I always wore pants for a long, long time. And part of that was because I spent a lot of my youth working in, like, fields and gardens and ditches and stuff, and you'd better be wearing some fucking pants and some boots. I used to wear boots and no other shoes. That's sort of a protective wall around your feet, and they made me feel safe. I used to wear pants instead of shorts. It's sort of a protective wall around your body to make you feel safe and to keep other people out. And part of that was embarrassment over my physical form. And now I'm not embarrassed in my physical form. I'm quite proud of my musculature, and I'm quite proud of my physicality and my ability, because it's gone from non-existent to pretty fucking existent. It's pretty cool. So I see some of that in Camus' mask femness and Tomino trying to explore it, and this constant rejection of Camus of the elements of himself that are feminine, and then this deep and like almost magnetic seeking of feminine entities in his life in order to figure it out, partly and masculine entities, right? Replacements for mother and father, but also peer replacements for male and female as well, like Astanagi as a friend and Fa as a love interest, but Rakoa and Emma as these other potential feminines that he's just drawn to, and Shar as this father figure. I don't know, man. And again, I'm sorry if I've said some wrong shit, and even some duplicitous, contradictory shit. I'm putting these ideas into sort of a quantum state of uncertainty, and I'm allowing myself to be uncertain about everything that's occurring in Zeta and sort of just flow with it and do that flowing thing, because I think that flowing thing is the answer, right? If I've got this depression around Zeta, right? It's a desire to not look at Zeta, or a reluctance to look at Zeta, and it comes from a lack of understanding of Zeta. So what's the solution? Well, the solution is that maybe you become undepressed when you're in a flow state, and maybe I can become more in a flow state by just flowing with conversation about Zeta and not worrying too much about being right. Because if I already take as presupposition that I'm wrong about at least half of Zeta, and wrong on every level, wrong about what Tomino intended, wrong about what's actually there, because I like to look at things in Schrodinger's author terms, and this is a term that I'd love to use with you guys. We've spent the entire day so far talking about what Tomino thinks he was writing, and a bunch of times as we've gone through, I've said a thing that's really arrogant, which is, well, that's not what he wrote. He wrote the opposite of that. But I think that happens all the time, and it comes to death of the author as a concept. So death of the author as a literary analytical concept is view the piece of work as though the author doesn't exist, and whatever things they said about the work and what it's supposed to mean don't exist. Just take from it what you can take from the text alone. And then when you go against Death of the Author and you say that's not the best way to look at it, you have to look at it in the context that it was written, and you have to look at what the author was intending, and then you can judge a piece of work based on whether it achieves what the author intended versus whether it achieves something overall in general. And I think both is the answer. Both, separately and simultaneously. You look at what the author achieved and see whether they achieved it, but I prefer, before spoiling my brain on what the author tried to do, look at the thing as though the author didn't exist, as though you don't know who the author is, and the author has never made any commentary ever, right? Like it was written under a pen name and nobody knows who this person is. Neat. That would be quite helpful. So, as we've been looking at it from that perspective, it's like, well, Tomino's works are really, really interesting because Tomino knows exactly what he's trying to do and does exactly not what he's trying to accomplish, as well as what he's trying to accomplish at the same time. Does that make sense? It doesn't, right? But it's like, it's viewing the whole thing as uncertainty and utilizing what Tomino says he was doing to lock in pieces of it, but then letting those pieces flow back into uncertainty and reevaluating them and going, well, do I really trust Tomino to know what he's actually talking about? And the answer is no. No, I absolutely do not. I want to be very clear about that. I don't trust a damn word that Tomino says about his art. And I don't trust the word of any damned artist about what they think their art means. Not one bit. Not one bit do I trust it, and also I trust it completely. At the same time, and you can do the same thing. You can do the same thing. I mean, he made it. It is absolutely sourced from him, and so his opinions of it and his intent within it is crucial and obviously a part of it. But he demonstrated early in our first conversations that he has no idea what the work is even. He's got these watercolor images of Zeta Gundam because he experienced creating the thing and hasn't watched it since. And he watched a bunch of it, and his revelation was, I guess this thing's actually kind of cool, when he thought it sucked. So, I don't trust him at all. Not one bit. But also I trust him completely, because who else would I trust? Fascinating. Fascinating. Alright, sorry for blathering. Ano. Nowadays, the middle and high schoolers who watch Zeta Gundam are entering the workplace, right? Tomino. I'm not conscious of it in the creative process, but my works certainly reflect their times. When I'm making a work, I feel it's controlled by my own tastes and intentions. But if you look at it from a 7 or 8 year old or 8 year distance, even at my lowest ebb, you can understand that it's from that time. Even if I disavow or deny it, it's a reaction to its era, so that era remains in every part of the work. It's unfortunate, but it won't be a masterpiece, because a masterpiece is something timeless. No, I disagree. A masterpiece is something that's, well, every time is timeless, because the existence of every era builds into the existence of the next era, and the existence of all the layers of thought and art that are produced in that era fundamentally alter the next era. Gundam is already timeless, not necessarily because it tells a universalizable story, although I think it does. But because it affects others and has made its way into the great cultural zeitgeist in a grand sense. And I think he calls it not a masterpiece, but I think other people would. Specifically Zeta, which is interesting. My works certainly reflect their times, always. I feel as if it's controlled by my own tastes and intentions, but if you look at it, you can understand that it's from that time. It's a reaction to its era, so that era remains in every part of the work. Okay, so at least he understands that what is created by the conciseness of a piece of media or art is a reflection of the entire experience of everyone who's involved in it. He hasn't expanded it out to the entire production staff, which I think is a crucial expansion, which is part of the reason that I pursue production staff anime, like group or collaboratively built things, because it means that there are more layers of people's thought, which means you get a better depiction of the time, actually, and of general humanity and of thought. It's a better reflection. But cool. Okay, I was able to depict Kamiyu because, at the time of Zeta Gundam, Japan was still in a dreamy state. People said, you can't have an ending like that in a robot show. And I could reply, yeah, I know, that's why I did it. Shouldn't there be at least one work like that? So I wonder if Kamiyu will get dead or something like that. That would make sense. But I couldn't say that this year or the next. The whole world is darkened by a continuing recession. If Kamiyu showed up now, it would be unbearable. Interesting. Ano says, and we got big skips, so there's spoilers here. Ano says, it's not easy, is it? Recently, I watched all of Zeta Gundam again for the first time since the original broadcast. Now I have my own experience as a director. I've come to understand it, but it seemed pretty confusing. In particular, when Haman appeared in the second half, I wondered how things were ever going to be resolved, which is very interesting that that's precisely the point at which I, fizzled. Where I, what's going on? And everything's in chaos. And Tomino says, I guess they weren't, haha. So things weren't ever going to be resolved, which maybe you should have spoilered. No shade, you're all good. Ano, at the time, I couldn't understand the protagonist Camille at all. Looking at it again, I vaguely understood him, saying, oh, even though he's the protagonist, this person is in the role of a bystander. And what's more, you also have Sirocco watching from the sidelines, Char playing the part of Lieutenant Quattro, and Amuro ashamed of being pathetic for 7 years. They're all in a state of confusion, haha. And meanwhile, Amuro and Char see their own past selves in Camille. We often see depictions of the same mistakes being repeated, so were you trying to say, we can't help repeating our folly? Tomino, that wasn't clearly articulated, so those depictions aren't well organized and appear confusing. He misses it, actually. They are perfect depictions of chaos. Because, as he says, Japan was still in a dreamy state. And what is a dreamy state? A dreamy state is not knowing what will be next. It's a dream state of everything being okay, right? It's the dreamy state of the big bubble before the pop. But there's uncertainty in that dream. And every time things go well, there's this undercut of what will fall. Because we know that everything goes in waves. And everything goes in waves. It really do. It really do be in waves, man. Ugh, fundamentally. Everything is both particles and waves. Deal with it. Fucking, I don't know. That wasn't clearly articulated, so those depictions aren't well organized and appear confusing. I'd like to say they actually have this kind of hidden meaning, so you should think of them this way, but I'd be lying. As for Camille, that's correct in terms of his initial setting, but I had a problem. I didn't really understand the process of becoming autistic, in which introspective problems are repeatedly presented in the mind. Whoa. I'm just gonna leave that be. When I was depicting Camille, I couldn't follow that psychological process because I was trying to depict him by including characters who never should have entered the dramatic space, such as Char and Amuro. As a dramatist, I didn't understand the process of becoming autistic, and that's another reason he's hard to understand. I'm a TV creator after all, so the artist's way of making things suits me better, and I think I'm good at it. To me, Camille Bidan was certainly a character who carried a heavy burden. So I think we've got an issue here, which is the representation of autism. And the problem is definitional. I don't actually know what clearly Tomino doesn't mean what I mean when I say autism. Because when I say autism, I'm referring to the now better understood autism spectrum disorder that is not a thing that results over time. It's something fundamental about the human as far as we know. There's no process of becoming it. You start out as it. As far as I know and as far as we know. And so maybe he's talking about something else. Maybe the word has been translated as autistic and it's not the word that he's using. I'd like to know. This is why I actually need to learn Japanese over the next year. Learn it so that I can read this interview as Japanese. As a dramatist, I didn't understand the process of becoming autistic, and that's another reason he's hard to understand. I'm a TV creator after all, so the artist's way of making things suits me better, and I think I'm good at it. To me, Camille Bidan was certainly a character who carried a heavy burden. Ano, maybe that burden was too heavy. I think the character of Murasame, on the other hand, worked very well. Where did she originate from? Tomino, she's linked to Camille's ongoing story. I wanted to depict Camille as simply as just an autistic kid. I only have a sensory recollection of 4 now, but I really liked her. There's one thing I realize now, though. After I made 4, Camille didn't work anymore. I remember that he was absorbed by her. Ano, in the end, the two of them have the same nature, right? Tomino, 4's representation was supposed to be simple, but that wasn't the case. All the character creation modeled on Camille Claudel was concentrated in 4 and Camille. They became firm, fleshed-out characters. At the time, I was doing a novelization for Kodansha, and when I finished 5 volumes, the editor said to me, the parts with 4 Murasame were a real highlight, so it's good. Back then, I was just happy to hear it, but on further reflection, I had nothing after that. In the end, that's all there was to Zeta Gundam. I remember being crestfallen that I'd written 5 volumes when 2 would have been plenty. Conciseness. That year, she won first place for female characters in Tokuma Shoten's Anime Grand Prix, even though she had few appearances. I hadn't reckoned on that, but the fact that it was confusing and the fact that 4 worked so well were completely unplanned. But after 4, Camille fell apart. No, he fell together, man. Camille is represented in opposition as well. And what you did what Tomino did was he represented Kamyu reflected better in 4, and what happened is that reflection altered the way that he saw Kamyu, because he realized, as far as I can tell, that Kamyu, as demonstrated in the character, is not what he thought. 4 is an autistic character, and I don't see Kamyu as one. Now, we can disagree about that, and I think everybody's on that spectrum, but I don't see Kamyu as an autistic character. I see him as emotionally stunted, but that's a different thing, and it's something that can be overcome. I think. But 4 is fascinating. She's a second draft, really, and put into a female form, which worked better. Maybe because it's more distinct from Tomino and less comprehensible. Maybe because it's more otherized than the usual shonen protagonist, which Kamyu fits the archetype of, and so you feel this identification with him, which means that he doesn't feel... Well, he's weird and he's got some problems, but he doesn't feel to me fully autistic, or even on the Asperger's level. Like maybe, and there are elements of his behavior that certainly are, and at least in this process that he says about in which the process of becoming autistic, in which introspective problems are repeatedly presented in the mind. Ano, it would be nice if that sort of thing happened more in animation. Before 4. Kamyu was preoccupied by petty things, but afterwards, he's taken on the whole burden of Char's and Amuro's roles. Tomino, oh, that's sad, come to think of it. Whoa. Ano, and then once Hamon and Sirocco show up, he's carrying 4 people's burdens. From episode 20 onwards, Kamyu suddenly becomes very busy. Before 4, Kamyu is preoccupied by petty things, but afterwards he's taken on the whole burden of Char's and Amuro's roles. I said something, it was earlier in this video, I said that, like, men are dependent upon women, but the motive are dependent, and that's just fundamentally true, because people are dependent on people, and 50% of people are women, okay? On a base statistical level, it's true. Broad strokes, watercolors, okay? I'm not trying to paint a specific picture of what is man, I don't know, I know what I am, but barely. Barely. And hell, I don't know what women is, either. So maybe men and women are dependent upon each other, and themselves, and stuff. Before 4, Kamyu is preoccupied by petty things, but afterward he's taken on the burden. I'm just going to ignore the rest of the sentence. Taken on the burden. Why? Why? Because she's representative of the divine feminine? That's what awakens young men? Broad strokes, deep fundamental truth. I can't wait to get Erich Neumann's The Great Mother, his analysis of the archetype of the feminine in myth. I really want that book. I want it so bad. But I have to finish reading... Well, I have to finish reading my book on how to read books. I have to finish reading Gödel Bach, and I have to finish reading Jung's Man and His Symbols, which I'm a little bit of the ways into. Which is where, you know, he's the one who came up with that idea in the first place, and Neumann is a student of his. But I think that's correct. 4's revelation to Kamyu, which is a romantic revelation, but also an untouchably romantic, like she's off doing her own crazy thing, right? But she represents something in the thing, and it's her, it's not Fa, the one that he ignores, and it's not Rikoa or Emma Sheen, it's 4 that galvanizes Kamyu into a different direction, and he suddenly becomes very busy. And we'll see how he carries the roles and the burdens of Hamon and Sirocco as well as we move along. But suddenly things make quite a bit more sense to me. Fucking thank you, Tomino, for talking about this stuff. And thank you, Ano, for questioning him about it. And thank you, Jikalaitsa, for sending me the results. It's very necessary. Okay. Zeta Gundam. Project Prototype. Zeta Gundam Proposal. July 1984. Zeta Gundam. Char's Counterattack. Proposal. Since, written by Yoshiyuki Tomino, since the Mobile Suit Gundam series was created 6 years ago, we have also made very little progress in the global affairs of our world today. In fact, we may even have regressed as wars have spread. We lack a plan for economic recovery, and our present lives are mired in increasing stress and hardship. This is a phenomenon that's also been apparent in the anime-watching generation, and the nature of youth culture today appears to be becoming more and more trivial in substance. In the current climate, it's unlikely that anything other than blatantly cheery punchlines and stories about an acceptance of this current state of reality will resonate with the tastes of the audience today. Oh, prophet. Prophet. Prophetic. Watch this. I'm talking about today. In the current climate, it's unlikely that anything other than blatantly cheery punchlines and stories about an acceptance of the current state of reality will resonate with the tastes of an audience. Superheroes, man. Superheroes. Blatantly cheesy, blatantly cheery. And they're all about let other people deal with the change in the state of reality. Not the you. Not the you. You're cowering in the corner while the aliens attack. Let the billionaires deal with it. And the scientists and somebody else. Fucking superhero movies are such a goddamn plague. I get why they're compelling, but they're such a fucking psychic plague. Fortunately, Mobile Suit Gundam is a title that provides this realistic content. This is how I came up with the idea of writing a story about accepting reality with Char as the protagonist. If this were to be a story about mechanical robot upgrades or a science fiction anime with fantastical situations, it would hardly be any different from other mecha genre works in the previous story part 2s. When writing the sequel, I pictured that the people who survived the events of the wars would be leading difficult lives. Hypothetically speaking, what if we were to imagine a scenario where the entire human race has evolved into new types? How would they be living? What if we were to make a story that addressed a plot from that angle? I believe these questions are at the heart of the current plans to produce Zeta Gundam. The depiction of an era of chaos and stagnancy depicted could be a mirror of our current state of affairs. This would be a time of overindulgence and starvation. In other words, the people of this era will have failed to recognize that an overabundance of love and affection has hindered the birth of special children with unique deficiencies. In these times, people would force their love upon one another. Through this series, I hope to illustrate the realistic understanding of people who can temper their own affections and take no more than what they would need to exist as an individual. He recognizes the parasitism of forceful love. Whoa, Tomino. I'll explain because I can't explain. I have the hairs on the back of my neck are up. The depiction of an era of chaos and stagnancy depicted could be a mirror of our current state of affairs, now and then. This would be a time of overindulgence and starvation. Oh boy. Let's talk about it. We got some very wealthy folks in certain places, and we got some starving folks in America. We call it food insecurity, by the way. That's the politically correct, acceptable bite-off-what-you-can-chew term for it. Food insecurity percentage America. 10.2%. 41 million people struggle with hunger in the United States. And 23% of children live below the poverty line. In America. In a supposedly first world nation. Global food insecurity percentage? About 10% of the population. Minimum. Severely food insecure, which is to say starving. 924 million people face, quote, food insecurity at severe levels. We've gotten richer, and we've gotten poorer. A time of overindulgence and starvation indeed. In other words, the people of this era will have failed to recognize that an overabundance of love and affection has hindered the birth of special children with unique deficiencies. Whoa, man. That's a concise idea. And it's an idea that I've been circling around for a little while. Pain causes character. Well, here's the idea that I've had. The people who I see who have their shit together have been forced to get their shit together because the universe has not been kind to them. And the people who I see who talk the most about how bad things are, and how bad they have it, and how much everybody else is hurting them, and how their rights are being infringed, are the people who haven't experienced a damn bit of pain. And that's a flip-flop of the way that it should be. And that's not to say that everybody who's out there expressing their pain is lying or false. But I see a lot of people on the radical left specifically, because that's where you go when you think that things need to be changed, on the hard left. And I'm leftist. I mean, I'm off the charts in Big Five trait openness, which is the best determiner of democratic leaning. And I'm off the charts in terms of not being conscientiousness, which is the best trait determiner of conservative leaning. I'm the opposite of conservative. Psychologically, the opposite. But I see this on the radical left, and it scares the hell out of me. The radical right scares me too, but they seem so inept. They seem so goofy and dumb that I really don't find them threatening. At all. I mean, they got guns, but... I see people who have experienced no pain in their entire lives looking for a way to get cred by claiming victimization in some dimension. And usually it's not personal, it's like social group. I get to be part of this genre, this big generalization of people, and therefore I get to view all the other generalizations of people as being the victimizers, and I get to use that as an exchange for power that allows me to engage in cathartic, resentful, destructive iconoclasm and tear other people down. That's what I see over and over and over. I met a young woman, beautiful young woman. She came over to our house. We have a hangout every Friday or so, and she came over and was brought over by a friend of a friend, and she's 19. And she and one of my roommates started to become close in a semi-romantic way. They vibed off of both considering themselves non-binary, and certain other things, and she scares the hell out of me. Because she has not got a single clue about a damn thing in the entire universe. Except that she's a victim of everything. One of the first things that she said when she showed up, was that, oh, Americans, that they fucking hate Japanese people. They fucking hate Asian people. They want to put us in camps and kill us all. She believes this. And all systems are racist and patriarchal and horrifying and destructive and deadly. Which they are, but... the perspective that she brings to it is like, oh, no. And the insane thing is this. So, well, she's female, and she views herself as non-binary. So that's a second. So she's female and she's LGBTQIA+. Okay, that's two things. And then she's Asian and she seeks out majority groups so that she can feel like she's a minority within them and call them repressive and oppressive, which they are and have been. But you look at the percentages of people living in California who are of non-white heritage, for example, and they're pretty high percentages. We have a large Hispanic population, and they're doing great, some of them, as long as they're not being racist out, by fucking racist people. They're doing great, and in large part it's because, well, a lot of them have suffered. A lot of the Hispanic people I know, at least the first generation and then the second generation immigrants, have suffered. And so they've got their shit together and they know how to work and they know how to generate real value and they're willing to. And they're like, oh, suffer a little bit now to suffer less later? Done. Deal. Bet. Pay me minimum wage? I'm working my way up in the world. This will pay for school. Done. Bet. Good. People learning a language and getting their GED in a bilingual class and working 3 jobs to support themselves and their child because they're a solo parent. I see that shit pretty frequently, and I see it in immigrants from elsewhere too. Anyway, she's female, LGBTQIA+, not from the prevailing cultural group as far as she sees it. Oh gosh, what else? So many other things that she tries to tack on to it. To feel more like a victim, and here's the truth. She comes from a deeply wealthy family that has sheltered her from all forms of pain. Grew up getting extraordinary high-quality education, not just in Korea where she was born, but also abroad and studying abroad in Japan and studying abroad in the United States and studying abroad elsewhere. So she's at the top percent of the people with the most privilege in the entire world, and she walks around talking about how victimized she is. And that seems about exactly right to me, is that the people walking around talking about how much of a victim they are the ones who are not victims at all. And in fact, maybe doing the victimizing themselves. And that's a broad stroke, and it's not accurate, because then you'd start dismissing the people who are actually in pain and are going, I'm in pain. And we have to not dismiss them because their pain is legitimate. We should be very careful about weeding out the two, and that's part of the struggle and part of the difficulty. But an overabundance of love and affection has hindered the birth of special children with unique deficiencies. Yeah, a little bit of pressure, a little bit of harshness seems to make kids rise to challenges, seems to make people have unique deficiencies. And it seems like too much love and affection and, You get everything you want without even asking for it, just because existence itself makes you worthy of it. I don't know. I don't know if that's correct. I think maybe you have to prove that you're worthy of existing. Maybe. No, I don't think you have to prove that you're worthy of existing. So, okay, I'll backstep because everything's in uncertainty, okay? Fundamentally, people are people are people are people. This is why I need to make a channel, or I need to make a playlist that's just short videos where I say single lines that I absolutely believe and will not broker dispute upon. Things like people are people are people are people, which I could say happily because it's a truism, but of course it contains a lot more information. And it is essentially to say that no matter what phrase you put before people, they are people and they are deserving of all the rights that all other people are deserving of. White people are people, black people are people, brown people are people, red people are people are people. Straight people are people, gay people are people, trans people are people, non-binary people are people are people. Male people, female people, non-binary people, they're all people. If you can put an adjective before people and use it to describe a group of people, well, guess what? They're fucking people and they deserve the same rights as all the other people. So now we back up. What's the question? The question is, what are the fundamental rights that all people deserve? And it's something similar to the fundamental rights that your cells have, which is like, well, blood flow, which is nutrients, so you need food, and waste disposal and water. So blood flow, waste disposal, water. Community, they need connections to the cells around them. Grander community, they need a connection to the overall whole, which is neurons. So I think that implies that there should be a right to electricity and perhaps phone and or internet access globally for all humans, like a fundamental human right, I actually think. And they should have those things provided for by the overarching system up until the point that the cell or the person is capable of switching over and enabling themselves to take care of themselves. And potentially to generate a value for the world. So that means that education and figuring out a way, effective education, to figure out a way to get each person into whatever they could be doing. And that means trade schools for a lot of people, by the way. Like, gosh, so many people get turned off by fucking math, and they don't actually need it. And maybe they'd live better lives slightly if they were taught math for like 4 years, but maybe going into a trade school should be more valid than it is. I don't know. Figure out ways to get people educated so that they can contribute something and earn from their contributions and demonstrate to themselves that it's worth living, and that they can prove it by doing things that are worth doing. Wouldn't that be so sick? But they're fundamental human rights. Everyone deserves those before they prove themselves. But not everyone deserves an overabundance of love and affection and the feeling like they can do no wrong and the feeling like everything is just granted to them on a silver platter. So there's this balance between how much do you give and how much do you take, and I don't know. And oh my God. An overabundance of love and affection has hindered the birth of special children with unique deficiencies is so good. In these times, people would force their love upon one another. What a perfect depiction of exactly the radical left. That is exactly what it is, right? So maybe you say, okay, the radical right are forcing their hate upon one another. Seems correct, actually. The radical right is neo-Nazi right. It's the alt-right neo-Nazis. Essentially, they think that there's a cabal of probably racially motivated something that they have to protect the world from. They want to express their hatred in large quantities. That is to say, their dislike of the uncertain or the unknown. But the radical left wants to force love. Wow. Love isn't love if it's forced. And neither is tolerance. Because that's what tolerance is, right? Well, okay, that's what love is. Love is sacrifice. Love is, I care about you so much that I'll sacrifice the fact that I don't actually like being around you to be around you. That's love. By my definition, that is love. I will sacrifice an element of my oneness in order to be with you, brotherly or otherwise, right? And love is a doing, not a being. There are some elements of love that must be forced, because otherwise the basic human rights wouldn't exist. And part of those basic human rights is everyone should have the basic right to, well, to speak, and to not be falsely harmful in their speech. Which is to say libel and slander. Those are the words that we legally use for false speech. And we haven't quite ironed out, because everyone deserves to be able to be, to not be spoken to in a way that hurts them unjustly. You know, hate speech that's, fuck you because XYZ about you, you should die because XYZ about you, that kind of thing. Unacceptable, clearly. But where's the line? Where's the line? It's blurry. It's actually blurry. Because if we say blanket, every person deserves to not be insulted ever, well then what if the insult is true? Well, I think we have to say that if we can prove something to be true, we cannot allow ourselves to be insulted by the truth. I think that's the process of uncertainty, the process of being in flow state is you choose a direction and you're willing to recognize that the direction isn't right, but you go forward and you accept the untrue as you go through. Or you accept the true, and you accept that what you accept as true has to be held loosely so that it might be, I don't know. Because then it's like, what is fundamentally true? So it's partly in the phrasing of the thing, how it's expressed, and it's partly in the actual formulation of the idea and whether it's justified. Oh, it's complicated. I don't know. I'm diving into a deep end. I'm sorry. I'm going down a rabbit hole. That's okay. That's okay. In these times, people would force their love upon one another. Through this series, I hope to illustrate the realistic understanding of people who can temper their own affections and take no more than what they need to exist as an individual. He presents loving someone else as taking from them. And that's a beautiful presentation. I would like to suggest that the new types may be representative of people who think this way. I would say that this is the true theme of the work. Brilliantly, interestingly written proposal there, Tomino. Fascinating. And next one. The Soldiers. It's from the same article, I think. The same piece. A soldier that dies without a cause is not a soldier, for a soldier is something bound by a cause. A true soldier can only die for the sake of his comrades. I think this indicates to me that Camus is going to die by the end of this, which makes sense. And I could be wrong, and I'm happy to be. A soldier is only able to give up his life when the preservation of his species is ensured. This conviction is held until death. Yeah, that's a classic idea for altruism, is that it just has to do with preservation of the species. You know, you get soldiers who jump on grenades. It's a pretty directly altruistic thing to do, and it flies well in the face of the people who say, well, all altruism isn't real altruism, you're just hoping that you'll get responses from blah, blah, blah. And they will even say that, well, you're part of a more collective human whole, and so you're ensuring that the species lives on, and so it's not altruistic, it's selfish in that regard. But it's like, well, where do you draw the line? What's outside of the self? And we seem to think that that sort of communalist behavior, at the very least, is a good thing, so maybe altruism is the word that we should use for it. It's pretty good. From the perspective of the average person, the soldier's way of life is sad and fleeting. This is especially poignant when these soldiers are coerced and manipulated by those in power. These soldiers are supported by the presence of women. Whoa! Whoa, big jump. Okay, whoa. This is especially poignant when these soldiers are coerced and manipulated by those in power. These soldiers are supported by the presence of women. Okay. Women are fundamentally unable to become pilots because their nature is aligned with preservation. He misses the myth. Sorry. I understand that the Japanese mythos around the grand feminine is different, but he misses the myth entirely. Women are uncertainty. I don't think that the nature of woman is aligned with preservation. And in fact, that's obviously not true, because statistically men are more likely to be conservative than women. Statistically, obviously not true. Just let me just double check. Gender correlation conservatism. Oh. Huh. It's a study by Gerhard Meisenberg for the Ulster Institute for Social Research in London. It examines the sex differences in socio-political attitudes in the United States using a general social survey. It solves the seeming paradox that women have been described as both more religious and more liberal than men. The results indicate that women are indeed more religious than men and more socially conservative in many respects, as indicated by earlier research. However, they are also more economically liberal in the sense of favoring more social expenditures by the government. Which is to say, those are the elements of economic liberalism that are centered around protection of the weak. And, you know, women and children is what we would call it frequently. At least in a religious mythological sense, it's the widows and the orphans. And the women are more generally, in broad general correlative sense, saying this again, interested in protecting the weak. That tracks. The observed differences do not fit the present political alignments of the United States. They rather indicate that women more than men are concerned about protecting people from economic hardships, from threats emerging from non-standard beliefs and worldviews, and from the darker side of their own nature. The sex differences can be described as lying upon a protection versus freedom dimension, similar to what has been described for political alignments in many non-Western countries. At the level of specific issues, most sex differences have remained quite stable from the 1970s to the 2010s. Women are more religious and more socially conservative in many respects, and more fiscally liberal. That's mind-blowingly not what I thought was the case. What an interesting thing to discover. Thanks, science. I mean, this is the science process, right? I think that this thing is true. Hold on, let me check. Look through 3 studies, find a study that's exactly a cross-dimensional study on this issue over a number of years. And it says exactly the opposite of what I thought was true. Am I wrong, or is the world wrong? Well, I'm wrong. So interesting, Tomino is more right. Very interesting, I back off. Women are fundamentally unable to become pilots because their nature is aligned with preservation. Now, again, I think that the lines get way blurrier than this. And his whole fundamentally unable is just false. Women can be pilots. And if there are women watching this, I don't know if I've scared you off already. If there are women watching this, you can pilot a Gundam if you fucking goddamn want to, lady. And you can be Haman Karn, and you can be as masked as you want. And I'll say this to the men, too. I don't think there's anything gay about being femme. I certainly don't think there's anything shameful or stigma-worthy about being compassionate and communal. And I think that we would be well served to turn those into more masculine traits if we could. Or to expand the definitions of masculinity to include them, so that you don't feel fucking weird when you feel feelings. You know, like a human. This inherent inclination is also a primary element of survival, and women have no reprieve from this role. Once born as a female, even if her nature deviates from its natural course, women will either assume this role or yearn for it. This puts women on equal footing with men. No reprieve from the role of preservation. Women aspire to be equal with men in stature. This aspiration is what separates women from men. Men already are, and they're content. They're aspiring toward themselves. Men compete with men, women compete with men? Something like that? Men compete with men, but not with women. Women compete with men and with women. How about that? On different axes. Especially after the sexual revolution, that is accurate. And there... Oh, okay, we get an idea. There's an idea there. Okay. So for 20 bajillion years, or whatever, men have competed with men and with chaos and nature and uncertainty, okay? And of course, they've developed imaginations of nature as female because it's the thing that most men are seeking as well. It's the thing they don't understand as well. Okay, cool. Women compete with women mostly at that point. Now they also compete against nature, but they're competing with women, and they're competing to protect themselves and the children. That was the, again, aspiration. As he said, we won't be debating the validity of this aspiration. I'm not debating the validity of this. It might be totally invalid and great. We're going to find out over the next 20 years anyway. We're going to find out whether it's valid or not. Because we changed it. We changed it when we invented contraception. And specifically the pill. We changed it dramatically. And it's not... We can't put the cat back in the box. It's out, man. It's out. And probably a good thing. I think it's probably good. But for 20 bajillion years, women competed with women for men. Women competed to some extent against nature for survival, but mostly it was the men going out and doing the fighting of the mammoths and the saber-toothed tigers in order to protect the women. Oh god, I was talking about snakes and snake fear with one of my friends because I was talking about how deep our ability to recognize snakes is. It just came up in conversation, and his mom was there. She's the woman of the house, and she runs this place, and she is one of those Hispanic immigrants who works her ass off because she has her shit in order. She told me, I was talking about snakes and talking about how seriously bad snakes are for monkeys. When you're a monkey and you live in the forest, you live in trees, snakes and trees eat baby monkeys, and so we're really attuned to snake fear from an innate at an earliest age. It's not a learned thing. It's structured into you to be able to look at a bunch of branches and woods, and if there's a snake in it, you see it. Our pattern recognition for snakes is absurd, and we use our pattern recognition for snakes as a base structure for a pattern recognition for all monsters and all evils and all enemies. It's why we so often view our enemies as reptilian. It's why, I mean, the dumbass idiots on the alt-right in the QAnon circles, they think that there's a bunch of literally cold-blooded reptilian lizard people who eat children. Which is a weird mythological dream interpretation of the idea that there's this governmental entity that is consuming the youth. Cold-blooded vampiric governmental entity consuming the youth. Okay, there's a dream idea there. It's dumb as fuck to literally believe it, but to theoretically believe it, it's a way to put things into a myth for us, because snakes are a deep myth. It's why Satan is viewed as, like, reptilian a lot. It's why dragons are dragons. They're snake, tiger, hawk beasts with scales. It's a snake fear. So I was talking about this, and she came over and she did what she always does, which is, do you want me to tell you something? Which is, she wants to tell you something, and she's just trying to ask, and it's not how you do it, but we deal with it, and I'm like, yes, tell me. Cool. And she goes, my grandfather in Colombia, where she came from, my grandfather used to, the first thing that she said was, snakes, when a woman is breastfeeding, snakes can smell it and they're attracted to it. And I don't know if that's true. Snakes breastfeeding. Just individual people saying it, some true or falses. There are a couple of places, it's a cultural belief at least. Oh, and lactating mother rodents, which are a primary food of snakes, they leak milk, which does smell, and that smell does attract mammal-eating snakes. Now, snakes don't actually use milk or eat it, but as an indication that the mammal is vulnerable, I'd buy it in a second. But the story that she told was that her grandfather, while her grandmother was pregnant and was nursing children, her grandfather would go out and capture snakes. He'd go to the riverbed by their home that had a bunch of snake holes near it, and he'd go and he'd reach in, grab the snake inside, pull it out, cut off its head, and he'd take the snakes back into town, and he'd skin them and sell the skins and the meat. And that's how he made his living. That's how he made his living. Now, I don't know how true the story is, but the story has remained as an oral tradition story passed down by the grandmother and the grandparents down to this woman who is now passing it down to me and down to her son who was there as well. So there's something going on there. And what's the story there? The mother is vulnerable, suckling the newborn life, the baby that must be protected. The father goes out into the chaos of the environment, finds the snakes, kills them, chops them up, and makes the living off of them. Talk about going and killing dragons and claiming your reward. So, the women, for 20 bajillion years, competed against women, and not against men particularly, because men had their hierarchies and women had their hierarchies, broadly. In most patriarchal societies, the ruling structure and the hunting structure are the same structure, and they're the male structure. And then there's the care of things structure and the protection at home structure. Now that I put that into place in the study, it makes so much more sense to me now. It just makes so much more sense. And I'll make an argument here. I'll make a tangential argument, which is, this is why generalizations are useful. They're not true in every circumstance, but they're useful. So what changed? Control over vulnerability. by and large, in modern developed countries, women have almost complete control, unseen control, because condoms were a different thing, and men are in large part in control of whether they put a condom on properly. Like, you can do it as a woman, absolutely, and you should, but like, the man knows that he's put a condom on and there's a barrier there and he doesn't want to put a condom on because his innate drive is to put babies in you. Broadly, generally, blah, blah. Okay. But the pill allows the sexual freedom of women completely. Without it, it would not be so. Because the risk goes to 0.01% if you're using it properly. And it's 0.01 times 0.01 is way small percent if you're using it properly and using prophylactic contraception with condoms or something similar. So, when women are free sexually, not restrained sexually, they can experience the sexual world without the deep risk of becoming endlessly vulnerable. Men compete with men and compete with nature for women, but they don't compete with women. Women compete with women and compete with the world to protect themselves and children, but they didn't compete with men, and now they can compete with men, and we've moved toward women being valid in the workplace, which they goddamn are. Women are smart as shit, especially, equally likely to be smart as men, obviously. And if you don't believe that, then if that's not obvious, then you haven't met enough women or enough men. And that's important too. Men aren't more likely to be dumb than women. I've met some dumb women. I've met some dumb men, and it's fine. I met some smart gals and some smart guys, and it's fine. It's about the same. IQ and gender don't correlate. They just don't. The ability to process information doesn't correlate. Emotional intelligence does correlate because women are better at it. It's a more womanly thing. Good for them. Good. Lucky fuckers. Lucky fuckers. So that's the aspiration then, is there's an unfairness. Women would like to be able to compete with men on certain things, and women are just as good at certain things, like authority, in a lot of ways, as men, and just as competent, especially in our modern day, where most of the work isn't physical, upper body strength requiring labor, and it's more mental. Women excel. The women are crushing us in schools too, and when I say us, I mean by and large men. Rate of men going to higher education is down. Rate of women going is way up. And there are a lot of reasons for that, but it's a problem. It is a problem. That aspiration is what separates men from women, because men don't have a bigger men to look at except other men, right? And women have this wall of, they got something to fight against, man. Something to prove. To prove they're at least as good, if not better, and it seems that they are at least as good, if not better, at almost everything, and that's rad. But the difference is that aspiration, and Tomino's role here is he's saying that aspiration is invalid, actually. He says we won't be debating the validity of this aspiration, but, I guess, okay, no, that's correct, yeah. At the same time, it is because of these women, that the men as pilots are able to face their deaths. Because of the potential of future, I think the preservation of the species is what that means. Accordingly, these women serve an important role in conveying what it means to be a pilot. Lots of soldiers die for their wives back home, true. Women aspire to convey the hopes and desires that will be inherited by their children and by future pilots. This is the primitive expression of the species. This is a future when this natural course has become warped. So what he's saying is this is the future where women are being put into the roles of pilots constantly, and that's warping the perspective. Whether the aspiration to be viewed as equal in stature with men is valid or not is not up for debate. He's not going to debate that, but he is going to debate whether the actuality of women taking the same roles as men is going to be correct, because that is a warping of natural courses. Now, nature isn't always right, and frankly, if you want to believe that nature is the natural way is the way, well, sell all your shit, throw away all your clothes, and go wander around in the forest for a little while, and tell me how long it takes for you to get an infectious disease, a parasite, or eaten. Have fun in nature, bud. Go with no camping gear, no tent, no sleeping bag, and freeze to death in one day. You have one day. You might survive one day. You might survive a week if you've got training. You know, if you've read enough of the books about people who've done that stuff, that you have some training, you might be able to survive a week. Then you're gonna die. You're gonna die, because you got no fucking clue. Nature is not a cool thing. So maybe the natural course should be warped. But he's envisioning a society, or a microcosm society, where women are stepping outside of their traditionalized safety protected gender role, where they're supposed to be like the war wives pining for their husbands who are out at sea or whatever. That seems very restrictive and a very male perspective to me. It seems very fraught. But he's trying to argue it. He's trying to argue it in a good way. And I have to remember that this is an article that was written some decades ago. And it's way forward thinking for some decades ago. Like way beyond forward thinking for some decades ago. Hell, it might be forward thinking for now. Because it feels to me like it's impossible to say, even if you are a woman, that you would prefer not to be in the workforce at the moment. Or that you desire to raise children, or something like that. That seems wrong. Like, it seems wrong to me that it seems wrong to say, I'm not a traditional feminist, I would like to raise children, for example. I think, I could be wrong, but I think women are bombarded by this idea that that is the anti-feminist patriarchy speaking through you, and not something that you should identify with, which becomes a real problem when women hit the metaphorical wall, right? Which we call 30, but it's changing. It's way beyond 30. But the hormonal state where the ticking clock clicks, and well, a lot of women would like to have children. Actually, a lot of people would. I would. A lot of men would like to have children, and it seems like a lot of women are being told, well, you get to choose that between that and your career. And I think statistically, they choose the children. Not all, but I think it takes a very masculine woman to choose her competitive job and her career over family. Women leaving careers. Researchers say work culture microaggressions and being overworked and underrecognized are pushing more women to leave. For every woman at a director level who got promoted in 2021, 2 women directors left their company. And work doesn't stop at the end of the business day. Women are far more likely to be responsible for their family's housework and caregiving compared with men, especially at the senior management level. Witherspoon said trying to strike a work-life balance felt like juggling knives on a roller coaster without a seatbelt. And the pandemic made it worse and harder. Companies have been working hard for the last decade to get more women into leadership. Well, here's a question. I don't know the answer to this. Are less women in leadership because women aren't as good as leading? Are less women in leadership because it's hard? Or because they're worse at it? Or because they just don't want to? Or because it's worse to them? Maybe they have something else that they'd rather be doing. Maybe men are dumb. Because men are dumb and will chase gold, will chase money 70, 80 hours a week, no prob. I think women are smarter than that, actually. Generally. So this is the third article that I've seen that's claimed that the reason behind it has to do entirely with microaggressions and social things, and there gives no evidence that that's the reason. That just assumes that that's the reason. They look at the process, which is there aren't as many women in leadership, and despite all of the attempts of companies to incentivize women in leadership and to tell women that they should be in leadership and to ask women to join leadership, it's not working. But there's no evidence presented, not one bit of evidence presented that I see, and that doesn't mean that I see everything, that the reason is because women feel like they're being disrespected. The option to work remotely is especially important to women. Only 1 in 10 women wants to work mostly on-site, and many women point to remote and hybrid work options as one of their top reasons for joining or staying with an organization. When women work remotely, and then here we go. These preferences are about more than flexibility. When women work remotely at least some of the time, they experience fewer microaggressions and higher levels of psychological safety. That might be true, but it says that that's the reason for the whole situation, and I don't buy it. It seems like McKinsey, who I'm reading right here, are trying really hard to ignore that there are fundamental differences between sexes. Fucking weird. Fucking interesting. And again, it's like, I understand the desire to stay the hell away from generalizations, but generalizations can be useful. This is a future when this natural course has become warped. Wow, what an interesting one. Next, and last thing that we're going to say. There was no screenwriter to battle with Tomino, so Tomino's notes ended up becoming the actual script. In a normal situation, Tomino's notes go to the series composition person, which go to the script person. In Zeta Gundam, Tomino's notes go to the script person, who is himself also Tomino. So, there's something to that, which is that we get the unfiltered, uncertain, conscious mind of Yoshiyuki Tomino, which is to say his unfiltered genius. So it's not hemmed in many ways by the ideas of other people. But filters are useful. They help to constrain ideas. And when you hand a script to your script person or your series composition person, or you hand the notes to them, and they go, I don't get it. Well, then you at least have to try to express what it is, and the two of you have to get to a point where your expression makes a little bit of sense to both of you so that you can agree upon it. And if you don't have that, you just say, well, I get it, and I wrote it out, and so I get it, and so it's perfect. Ta-da! And that ain't it. You gotta iterate more. Cool. Cool. I feel like I've made headway in understanding Tomino, and also the world. Partly because to see things from his perspective, I have to jump into out of my own. Also talked about some fucky shit here in this video, and I want to reiterate something, which is that if I've said anything in this video that was like XYZ is true, I'm trying it on. Okay? I'm trying on the hat. This hat is interesting. Pop. This hat is interesting. Oh. That's a way of looking at the world. Pop. Or like trying on pairs of glasses even. Put on a pair of glasses and I go, the world is red! Well, it is from that one lens. Just beware that I'm talking about it through the lens as though it were reality. I don't really fully believe or lock in most of these ideas. And I hope that I've proved that, not intentionally, but I hope that I've actively proved that by saying, I think something is this way. Let me go check. Tick, 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 tick. Whoa, it's not that way at all. What did I know? That's the proof in the pudding, right? That I'm capable of changing my mind about these things, that I'm not irredeemably arrogant, because I'm arrogant as hell, but I'm not irredeemably so. But I'm putting on lenses. I don't know which lenses are more valid than others. There are some things that are true, regardless of which lens I'm wearing. Interesting. Those things seem true regardless. One of those things is, well, no matter what lens I look at art from, it seems like there's something compelling about art. And, while I am almost loath to admit it, no matter what lens I look at Zeta Gundam from, my own, the lenses presented to me constantly by the commenters in my comments sections, Tomino's as he presents it himself, the sort of third-person omniscient that I sort of strive for sometimes when I view something as though the author is dead. Whatever lens I look at Zeta Gundam through, it is compelling to me. There's something about the story that's compelling and interesting. It may be compelling in its wrongness. Wrong things can be compelling all the time. We spend lots of our time looking at car crashes and train crashes, right? Because we're like, what the fuck went on there? And maybe Zeta Gundam is like that in some ways, where it's like, man, what happened to make this feel so weird? And I think I put together some pieces of it. Part of it is that there's less filtering. It's more a direct beam into the mind of this weirdo. Because Yoshiyuki Tomino is a fucking weirdo. He's got some weird ideas. And they might be genius. They might be doubly uber correct. Or they might be trash wrong. But it's worth looking at regardless. And so I thank you for taking the time to reinvestigate it with me. I think it's necessary. I think we're going to get way more out of it. And I think I'm running out of steam to talk. But I think we're at least one big step closer to getting something out of Zeta Gundam that I was missing before. And that I don't think I would get if I hadn't taken this break and paused and looked back and taken stock of where we're at. So I look forward to watching the rest. I don't know if that'll be next week. There might be a third one. 3 is a good number. It's like a real meaningful number. There's a rule of threes. So maybe we do a sandwich. We look at episode 1. We read through some of this stuff. I'll skim through some things on my own and re-go through some of the comment sections over the course of this week. And maybe we'll just look at, maybe next week what we'll do is we'll look at the last couple episodes. Essentially from the point where I made a big mistake, which is I didn't understand the Char Rakoa stuff, okay? Basically from that point where we get Rakoa, Char, Sirocco, Yazan, into Axis, Hamonkarn, Caecilia, is it Caecilia? I don't think so. The daughter, the little girl, into that element, right? That chunk of 3 or 4 episodes where I've been disconnected from it, and that swings us back into it. So that'll be our third rewind, little rewind, and then we'll come back to the present and the future. I think that might be the way. Let me know what you think. I'd love some more suggestions. I'd love some criticisms. I've spewed a bunch of weird ideas in this episode. I hope it's been enjoyable. If it wasn't, feel free to let me know. Try to let me know in a way that might actually change the way that I behave in the future. Like, I don't say nicely, but at least in a way that's stomachable and isn't immediately disgusting. Would be helpful. Because some people comment trying to criticize in ways that are immediately off-putting. It's like, well, fuck you too, man. And that's just not going to work. I want your criticism. I just want you to express it in a way that's effective. That way you can express it throughout your life as effective, and that would be good. I think this was a valuable 2 hours or so. I hope you agree. If not, I'm sorry. We'll get back to real Gundam soon. I promise. I have to do this. I am compelled. I am compelled by this compelling work of art to figure it out a little bit and figure myself out in relation to it a little bit. And isn't that the point? Isn't that what Tomino was trying to do? Was reach children who are in a world where everything's sort of falling apart? Feels like that's the world that I'm in. It feels like I'm a child, and feels like Tomino is reaching me. And it feels like this is the process of it. So anyway, thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed, and I'll catch you next week for more Zeta Gundam stuff. Peace.